Good morning, functions. Okay, this is the lesson that we taught on February 1st, 2021. We are subtracting rational expressions. So when we're subtracting rational expressions, it's actually the same process as adding rational expressions, except we have one additional step within our steps. So the biggest thing is that you need to make sure that you subtract the entire numerator. So when we're looking at two different fractions, we want to make sure that we distribute that minus to the entirety of the second numerator. And we only want to look at the numerator. We don't want to distribute it to the denominator, because if we do a negative over a negative, well, then we've just turned that whole thing into a positive, and we need it to stay negative. So we're going to make the numerator. Just worry about the numerator. Here are the steps again. Oh, look, it even says adding rational expressions, but this is the steps to subtracting rational expressions. Okay, so I fixed the slide. It says steps to subtracting rational expressions. First thing we're going to do, we're going to factor those denominators. Then we're still going to find that lowest common denominator. That's finding the factors in the first denominator and the second denominator and getting them together. We're going to find the domain of that lowest common denominator. Then we're going to multiply each fraction by whatever it's missing so that we can have a lowest common denominator. And then step 5, where we're going to simplify the numerator by distributing the negative and combining like terms. So that is the only difference that we have to do. So we're still going to distribute. So when we're multiplying the top and the bottom to get that lowest common denominator, we're still going to do all that. We're still going to combine like terms. But this time we're also going to distribute a negative that goes with it. Then we're going to factor the numerator, and then we're going to simplify by finding big ones. So that is the same step. So hit pause if you want to put that in your notes. I'm going to give this to class. I didn't give this slide to class, so I'm going to give them this today. Okay, so this is our first example. So the first thing we need to do is factor the denominator. Well, I'm looking at this, and it looks to me like r can't be factored. And then we have to remember that when we're looking at rationals, those can't be separated. So r minus 3 is fully factored, so we're going to find our lowest common denominator. And that's where we start here. Well, I'm going to need at least an r, because we're going to need at least whatever's in that first denominator, maybe some extra. So I'm going to put r, and then I'm going to go here. And a lot of students think that it's just missing the minus 3, but it's not. It's missing the whole thing. I cannot separate those. So I'm missing an r minus 3. So then now I have my lowest common denominator, which is r times r minus 3. So I'm going to set them both not equal to 0 and solve. And I'm going to set r minus 3 not equal to 0. And I'm going to end up with the domain being all real numbers except for where r cannot equal 0 or positive 3. Okay, so now the next step that we're going to do is we need to multiply by a big 1. So if I go to my first fraction, it looks to me like I have an r already, but I need this r minus 3. So I'm going to multiply by r minus 3. I'm going to multiply that. But if I do that to the bottom, I have to do that to the top. Now this is where in the steps we're talking about the big 1. r minus 3 over r minus 3 is just 1, right? So I'm multiplying by a 1 so that I can get a lowest common denominator. When I look at this second fraction over here, I have the r minus 3, but I am missing the r. So I'm going to multiply by r, and again, whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So now I can go ahead and take care of this and rewrite it. So I have my lowest common denominator, which is r times r minus 3, which is what I wanted. And then I'm going to go ahead and distribute this to get my new numerator. So I have 6 times r, which is 6r. Then I have 6 times negative 3, which is negative 18. So when I do something like that, I can just do all of that, and that's the distributing. That's that step 5 that I'm taking care of. So then I have my minus sign, and then I have my common denominator, r times r minus 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and distribute. I've got 5 times r, which is just 5r. So now I want to distribute that negative. Well, one thing that we can do when we distribute a negative, we can keep this fraction the same. We can change this to a positive and then change the signs in the numerator. There's only one term in the numerator, so I only need to change the 5 to a negative 5. So then I can rewrite this all over one fraction. So r over r minus 3 over 6r minus 18, and then I have plus minus negative 5, which simplifies in minus 5r. Now I can combine my like terms and get my answer. So I've got 6r and negative 5r, which gives me an r, and then I have a negative 18. And again, my answer is always going to be over that lowest common denominator. It just kind of stays along for the ride. And then I look at that and I see that I cannot factor r minus 18 any further, so this is my final answer. A lot of students want to simplify this r over r, but we cannot do that because it's not multiplication. It only works, so it's multiplication on the denominator, but it is not in the numerator, so this r is not by itself. That is the whole reason why we factor everything. Alright, so go ahead and get this one in your notes, and we are going to go. So I need to factor, I cannot, and then I need to look at this and I can see that they're exactly the same. So my lowest common denominator was given to me by the rational gods, and they are the same, so I'm not going to have to do a lot of extra work. To find the domain, I'm going to take that lowest common denominator and set it not equal to 0 and solve. And then I get 3x is not equal to negative 1, divide by 3. So then I get the domain is all real numbers, except x cannot equal negative 1 over 3. So I've got that. So now I don't need to multiply by anything, and so this is where I can just start simplifying the numerator. So I'm going to keep this one the same. I'm going to change that to a positive, and then I'm going to change all, I'm going to go back. I'm going to change all the signs over here, so I have a minus and a plus. And so now I can rewrite that. I have my lowest common denominator, and then I'm going to end up with 7x plus minus, so minus x plus 2, which is going to be equal to, so now I can combine my like terms, which gives me a 6x, because 7x minus 1x is 6x plus 2 over 3x plus 1. Now I'm down to that last step, step 6, where I want to see if I can factor the numerator, which I can. I can do a greatest common factor. So I can pull out a, looks like a 2. So then I get x, 3x, and 1. 2x times 3x equals 6x. 2x times 1 equals 2. So then my new answer is 3x plus 1. That denominator stayed the same. And I have 2 times 3x plus 1. Well, now look at this. I've got a big 1 right here. So here is the step where you find your big ones in adding and subtracting. It is at the very, very, very end. It's at the very end. So this is a 1. So my final answer ends up being 2 over 1, which is just equal to 2. So hopefully you got that in your notes, and we're going to do another one. This is the last example. All right, so I can't factor this. I can't factor this because we always want to factor our denominators. I got to remember that I can't break these up. This crew's got to stay together, so my lowest common denominator is going to be, well, I'm going to start with this denominator. So I've got q minus 1. I've got to do this denominator because it's totally different than this one, so I'm going to need both. So q plus 1. I'm going to find my domain by setting each one of those not equal to 0. I don't know why I wrote 2, sorry. Not equal to 0. So then I get my domain is all real numbers except q cannot equal a negative 1 or a positive 1. So I add 1 here, add 1 here, minus 1 here, minus 1 here. Alright, so now I've got that. Now I've got to get my lowest common denominator. So when I'm looking at this first fraction, I know I'm going to need to multiply the top and the bottom by a q plus 1 because that's what this one is missing. So I'm going to do q plus 1. Again, whatever I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. And then this one is missing the q minus 1, so I'm going to multiply q minus 1. Again, whatever I do to the bottom, I have, it's minus 1. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Always, always, always with fractions. Okay, so I know that I'm going to have this. So anything times 1 is itself. So my new numerator is going to be q plus 1 all over q plus 1 times q minus 1 minus, and then again this is the same thing, 1 times anything is going to be itself, so q minus 1 over q plus 1 times q minus 1. So I have all of that. Now I can do my creating one big fraction. So I know my answer is going to have that common denominator because once I find it, it's just kind of along for the ride until the very end. Alright, I'm going to keep this fraction the same. I'm going to change this sign. I'm going to change that sign, and I'm going to change that sign. So now I have this, and I can combine my like terms. So, or I can just write it out. So q plus 1 plus minus, which means minus q plus 1. So now I can combine my like terms. Again, my denominator is going to stay the same. Q plus 1, q minus 1. I've got q minus q, which is 0q, and 1 plus 1 is 2. I cannot factor the numerator any further, so that is my final answer. So hopefully you got that in your notes. That is what we covered in class yesterday on Monday. Please have a great day, and if you have any questions or if I went too fast, let me know and you can ask in class, or if you have Miss Wadley, you can ask her. Thank you.